Welcome to This Explainer. Today we're going to map out a really fascinating theological argument derived from a sermon by Pastor Christian Malone. We're looking at Romans chapter 1, and honestly, we are diving right into the deep end, navigating the incredibly complex, often misunderstood biblical relationship between divine love, human rebellion, and God's wrath. I'll tell you right now, this is a text that absolutely does not pull any punches. But understanding how this argument is structured gives us a profound look straight into the core of classical Christian theology.
So let's kick things off with the big elephant in the room. If God is love, how can he also have wrath? I mean, it feels totally contradictory to our modern sensibilities, right? But the sermon argues something really interesting here. It says that to truly grasp the totality of God's perfect love, you actually have to intimately understand the righteous reality of his wrath. The source material points out that, well, if God just acted toward humanity with this generic, permissive, anything-goes kind of love, we literally wouldn't know the first thing about justice or salvation or grace. Instead, the text claims that because God is perfect, both his love and his wrath are carried out in absolute perfection. You simply can't have the full picture of one without the other.
All right, let's jump right into section 1, Love, Wrath, and God.
Now, there is a very common modern misconception that we need to talk about. It's the clean slate myth. This idea that human beings enter the world entirely neutral, completely innocent, and inherently good. But Pastor Malone points out that according to this biblical text, humanity definitely does not start as a blank slate. Actually, scratch that, it's worse. We enter the world with a natively sinful nature. We are born into a state of active rebellion. The speaker uses a great, highly relatable point here. If you've ever raised a toddler, you already know you absolutely do not have to teach them how to do the wrong thing, right? It just comes naturally.
And this quote right here perfectly illustrates the Apostle Paul's uncompromising stance on this. In Romans 1:18, he says, "The wrath of God is being revealed from heaven against all the godlessness and wickedness of people who suppress the truth by their wickedness." Paul is making a massive, bold claim here. He's saying that no person is naturally righteous. And notice that the wrath of God isn't painted as some random, erratic outburst of divine anger in the sky. The text argues that it is a highly specific, active response directed specifically at those who intentionally bury the truth of God, a truth that is already evident to them.
Which brings us to section 2, Suppressing the Truth. The sermon really zeroes in on that specific word, suppress. And the speaker uses this highly visual, physical metaphor that I think is just brilliant. He compares our rejection of God's undeniable truth to a wrestling match. Picture a wrestler violently, stubbornly pinning an opponent to the mat. The text argues that humanity actually knows the truth of God's righteousness deep down, but we wrestle it to the ground. We hold the truth down so it can't get back up. Why? Well, simply because we want to continue in our own preferred rebellious ways, and we don't want the guilt getting in the way.
If we trace this chronological argument, it reveals a pretty stark devolution. We didn't start out bad and slowly get better over time. The sermon argues the exact opposite. Step 1 begins with creation, pointing all the way back to Adam and Eve's perfect communion and knowledge of God in the Garden of Genesis. Step 2 is the fall, where sin first enters the picture. Then step 3 is devolution. Despite what modern society loves to claim about our continuous upward progress, the sermon asserts that, spiritually speaking, we are pushing the knowledge of God further and further away, which lands us right at step 4, our present day, where we are actively holding down the truth. The argument is that we haven't evolved past our need for God, we've really just become a lot more efficient at ignoring him.
Let's move right along to section 3, Exchanging Worship for Idolatry. The text outlines this incredibly clear and honestly tragic progression. It's like a domino effect. Step 1, as we just discussed, is suppressing the truth of God. But here's the catch. Humans are fundamentally built to worship something. So if we aren't worshiping the Creator, step 2 shows that we inevitably exchange God's glory for something else. Most often, that's the worship of ourselves or created things like money, influence, or power. And this leads directly to step 3, which is the terrifying consequence. God simply steps back and gives humanity over to exactly what it desires. And that brings us to this profound psychological and spiritual insight from this sermon. We become what we worship. The speaker argues that sin acts a whole lot like a powerful addiction. When we obsess over our own power, our own bank accounts, or our own image instead of the Creator, we aren't just making a minor error in judgment. We slowly, subtly warp into the very shape of those fleeting, empty idols. We give our time, our energy, and our thoughts to these things until our entire identity is completely consumed by them.
And that brings us to section 4, the present reality of wrath.
This totally redefines our typical, everyday view of wrath.
I mean, usually we picture God's wrath as this future cataclysmic fire raining down from the sky, right? But the sermon points out that according to Romans chapter 1, God's wrath is actually a present reality. Right now, today, the most terrifying form of God's wrath isn't Him striking us down with lightning bolts. It is simply the act of God removing His gracious covering, stepping back and saying, okay, you can have exactly what you want. It is a terrifying paradox. Allowing humanity to have its own destructive, sinful desires is presented as the ultimate form of judgment because those very desires will naturally destroy us from the inside out.
The sermon presents a pretty stark contrast here to demonstrate this. Under the column of divine truth, humanity worships the Creator and follows what the text describes as in natural order. But then, under the disordered exchange, humanity starts worshiping created things. Pastor Malone points out that the Apostle Paul cites issues like homosexuality here, not just as random isolated flaws, but to really illustrate a specific theological point. He argues it shows just how deeply this spiritual brokenness penetrates, warping human desires away from God's natural design into unnatural ones driven by human lust.
And the fallout of this disordered worship? It is definitely not isolated. Look at this massive list. When God gives a society over to what Paul calls a depraved mind, the result is an overwhelming, total cascade of societal breakdown. Greed, envy, murder, deceit, malice, gossip, arrogance. It spares absolutely no aspect of human interaction. It's a complete dismantling of objective moral good. Why? Simply because society collectively decided to pin the truth of the Creator to the mat.
Which leads us to the absolute rock bottom, the chilling climax of Paul's argument. The ultimate sign of a depraved mind, the ultimate final manifestation of God's wrath, is when a society entirely loses its moral compass and begins to actively approve of and even applaud the very behavior that leads to its destruction. It's a total, mind-bending inversion of reality where we start celebrating the exact things that are actively destroying us.
Okay, take a breath, because we are finally at section 5, the hope of the gospel. Just when the tension of Romans chapter 1 seems completely unbearable, chapter 5 shifts our focus entirely. It provides this beautiful, much-needed resolution. But God shows His love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Much more shall we be saved by Him from the wrath of God. The sermon asserts a really powerful point here. The whole reason we study the dark, heavy, uncomfortable reality of God's wrath is so that we can truly comprehend the stunning magnitude of His grace. Think about it. You just cannot understand the beauty of the rescue if you don't realize how incredibly deep you were drowning.
Jesus steps in and offers an incredible and honestly totally unfair exchange of His own. Instead of leaving us on the left side here, condemned, deserving of wrath, and totally left to our own destructive devices, He takes the penalty of that wrath entirely upon Himself. By living a perfect life and dying a sacrificial death, the narrative shifts completely. The sermon explains that through humility and belief, humanity is justified. We are moved to the right side, viewed no longer as objects of wrath, but as beloved children who are entirely covered by grace. It's the ultimate trade.
So as we wrap up this explainer, I really want you to reflect on this ancient text's direct challenge to our modern lives. The theological argument we've unpacked is crystal clear. We are all wired to worship something, and we will inevitably become what we hold most dear. So taking a really honest look at your own life, your time, your money, and your deepest desires, what is currently pinning down your attention, and what are you choosing to truly worship today? Thank you so much for joining me on this one. Keep questioning, keep learning, and keep exploring.